Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. The Up and Up series returns, and in today's installment, we are going to update and upgrade Morophon the Boundless and the Shapeshifter with Changeling EDH deck. What's up, MTG BC? That is the MTG Burgeoning community. Here we are with another installment of the Up and Up series, and today we are going to update and upgrade Morophon the Boundless and those shape-shifting changelings. So what we're going to do today is we have 6 cards going into the deck. We have 6 cards coming out and 1 change to the Changeling Pool. If you are unfamiliar with exactly the purpose and the goals of our Changeling Pool, you can click the links in the description below and it'll bring you right up to speed. So let's begin with the cards that are going into the deck. Now, what we are doing is we are trying to make sure that we can get some more cards into our hand, and we're also trying to make sure that we can better set up our game-ending synergy with the World Tree. Because once we have the World Tree in play, if we also have Maskwood Nexus in play as well, we can empty our entire library of creatures and get them onto the battlefield, turn them sideways, and hopefully win the game. With that being said, we are going to start off with our first edition of Crop Rotation. Instant speed, 1 green as an additional cost to cast this spell. We have to sacrifice a land. And when we do, we search our library for a land card and put that card onto the battlefield and then shuffle our library. In a 5-color deck, it is not the greatest idea. It is not optimal to have to sacrifice a land. However, when the sacrificed land ends up turning into a land that can give all of our lands tap for 1 mana of any color, which is the World Tree, sacrificing any land to do so seems very, very fine, very, very non-problem, and something that we want to make sure that we can do in this deck as much as possible. Next card that's going into the deck is another instant, and that's going to be Stinging Study. It's an instant for 4 and a black mana. We draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the mana value of a commander we own on the battlefield or in the command zone. For the purposes of this deck, this is going to read, pay 4 and a black mana, draw 7 cards and lose 7 life. Now, 7 life is not a small amount of life. We are in EDH. We do start with 40, and we do have other ways in which to gain life riddled throughout the 99 of the deck, including spots from the Changeling Pool. For the bang for buck, 5 mana for 7 cards and 7 life, that seems very appropriate, and one in which that we can replenish our entire hand, because through experiential gameplay, it had been a sticking point that we just burned through the cards in our hand way too quickly. So Stinging Study is going to be included as a way in which to get an entire another hand of cards into our manos, and that is Spanish for hands. All right, and card number 3 that's going to be going into the deck, and this is another card that we can use to get World Tree into play, but it's also a card that we can use to get Maskwood Nexus into play. It's going to depend on the mana available and where we are during the point of the game, and that is the underutilized and underloved Wargate. For X and Bant colors, which is green, white, and blue at sorcery speed, we search our library for a permanent card with converted mana cost X or less and put it into play. So if we want that World Tree, we pay Bant colors and we put it right into play. If we want that Maskwood Nexus, we're going to pay a total of 7 mana, and the Maskwood Nexus is going to hit the battlefield and hopefully give us the juice we need to win the game. Either way, including Crop Rotation and Wargate is going to help strengthen the number of chances and opportunities we have to seek out the 2 most important cards in our deck. All right, with those 3 cards going in, we got 3 more to talk about, but first let's talk about 3 cards that are going to come out of the 99. All right, the 3 cards that are coming out in place of Crop Rotation, Stinging Study, and Wargate, we were running with 39 lands in this deck. that seemed to prove to be too high of a number. We were inundated with lands, and we needed to shrink the land base as a way in which to help diversify the spells that we have, which I think we're going to make a very balanced decision here. So let me just showcase what we're going to be taking out. In place of crop rotation, Unholy Grotto is going to come out. And here's the reason why. It only taps for a colorless mana, and we're playing a 5-color deck. Its utility of paying a black, tapping it, and putting target zombie card from our graveyard on top of our library, initially thought to be a very beneficial thing. However, this was going to help get our changelings from the graveyard back on top of our library and then into our hand. However, many of the changelings that are in this library, that are in the 99, many of them are just not worth the potential of drawing a different card off the top of the library. Once gameplay ensued, and from my experiences, I noticed that anytime I was trying to recur a quote-unquote zombie from the graveyard by putting a changeling on top of our library from the graveyard, activating Unholy Grotto, I was really selling short what I was able to draw from the top of my library for what seemed like it was just an underpowered return on the investment, an underpowered return on missing out on drawing a unique card. So if the utility of Unholy Grotto is kind of wasted in the 99 of this deck, it's very hard to justify keeping it in the deck just for the purposes of generating 1 colorless mana. So Unholy Grotto is coming out, and crop rotation is going in its place. I do not believe we're going to have any trouble in generating mana to cast our spells by shrinking the land base from 39 to 36. The next card that's going to be coming out, it's another land, and this is coming out for Stinging Study. It's going to be Seaside Haven. This is very similar to Unholy Grotto. All right, so it only gives us a colorless mana. Its utility is we pay Azorius colors of a white and blue, we tap it, and we sacrifice a bird, which for the purposes of this deck, we sacrifice one of our changelings. And if we do, we can draw a card. What was troublesome with this card is many times I had to keep up the white mana, the blue mana, and this land as a way in which to kind of pseudo-prepare for a potential board wipe or pseudo-prepare for some spot removal on what might be considered a more valuable changeling. There are a few of them that can be considered valuable in the 99. More than anything, it just ended up being wasted mana that I could have used to cast something from my spell just for the purposes of trying to regain the benefit of getting a card off of a creature that was heading to the graveyard. Very rarely was I sacrificing the creatures to draw cards because we needed the creatures on the battlefield either to chunk block down and trade down with our opponents, or to send into combat to deal the combat damage, because honestly, this deck's only win condition is going to be through combat. So Seaside Haven was just underperforming, and let's be honest, it kind of fell into the Unholy Grotto trap. Its utility was not exceedingly helpful, and if it's not, it's hard to justify keeping a land that only gives us a colorless mana in a 5-color deck. And that brings us to the third land coming out in place of Wargate, and that is Contested Cliffs. We're seeing a trend here with lands that were thought to have some very powerful utility features to them that only give us colorless mana, that after a lot of gameplay just turned out to be very underwhelming. And that's what we're getting with Contested Cliffs. And the reasoning for this is very simple. Its utility ability just doesn't help us out as much because our changelings are not big enough to really get rid of the creatures that we need to see leave the battlefield. We pay Gruul colors, which is red and a green, and tap Contested Cliffs, and target beast creature we control fights target creature an opponent controls. However, our changelings, which are considered beasts, are not really beasts when it comes to power and toughness. Often I had creatures on the battlefield that I could have really, really liked to have used in a fight to get rid of one of my opponent's creatures, but they just weren't big enough to do so. Now, that definitely changed if Morophon is on the battlefield, because Morophon is also a changeling and a beefy 6/6 at that. However, Those interactions were very few and far between. So again, we have a utility land here that was just underwhelming in performance, and if it's not a very valuable utility, it's hard to justify keeping a land that only gives us colorless mana in a 5-color deck. So Contested Cliffs is going the way of Seaside Haven and Unholy Grotto to make way for Crop Rotation, Stinging Study, and Wargate. So we dropping our land base from 39 to 36 for the purposes of cycling out some less useful lands and giving us some ways in which to get the much needed cards onto the battlefield to help us win the game in Crop Rotation and Wargate. And plus with Stinging Study allows us to draw an entire hand of cards. I do believe that shrinking down the mana base to accommodate these spells is going to help strengthen the overall performance of the deck. With that being said, we have 3 more cards to add to this deck, and for the purposes of where we are right now, no more cards are coming out of the 99 of this deck. What's going to happen is we are going to swap out 3 of the placeholders that would come from the Changeling Pool. If you're familiar with how we constructed this Shapeshifter with Changeling deck, you'll know that here we have our commander Morophon, and underneath it we have 84 cards. So we have Morophon and an 84 card library. And then randomly, during each time we sit down to play a game, we would randomly pull 15 cards, creature cards. They're not necessarily all creatures. Let me correct myself. 15 different cards from our Changeling Pool, 1 card each that supplements or strengthens one of the tribes of Magic. And the purpose for doing that was each time we sat down for a game with this Changeling deck, it was to be as unique of an experience as possible. So instead of pulling 15 cards each time we sit down for future games with this Changeling deck, we're going to pull 12 cards instead. So we had 15 placeholders in the 84 card deck. 84, 15 gives us 99. Those 15 placeholders are going to be reduced to 12. So we're going to add 3 more to the 84 card deck here, bringing us up to 87. And therefore, in the future, when we sit down to play, we won't pull 15 random Changeling Pool cards. We'll pull just 12. So to keep the whole theme and flavor of our Changeling deck in mind, limiting the number of Changeling Pool pulls, we want to make sure that we still accentuate and overall enhance the flavor of our Changeling deck, and these 3 additions are going to do that. The first one is a tribal instant. It is a Shapeshifter instant. It's 1 white. It's Shields of Velis Vel. It is Changeling, so this card is every creature type at all times. Creatures target player controls get +0/+1 and gain all creature types until end of turn. So we have ways in which to, tutor this card out because it is a Changeling Shapeshifter tribal instant. That gives us a lot of versatility when thinking about what we need to do with the creatures on our battlefield. So what this is really going to do, for the purposes of strengthening the overall theme of the deck, is for 1 turn, this is going to act as our Maskwood Nexus. We're going to cast this for 1 white mana, and we're going to have all of our creatures become all types at all times for 1 turn. If we deem a Maskwood Nexus to be one of the closing cards in this deck, one of the 2 cards that we want on the battlefield and under our control for the purposes of winning, then any card that we can include that might be a microcosm of what Maskwood Nexus could do should be valued, and that's what we have here with Shields of Velis Vel. I believe that the presence of this card in the 99 over one of the Changeling Pool cards is going to help strengthen and enhance the overall theme of the deck, because it gives us another instance of having a Maskwood Nexus in play without having a Maskwood Nexus. And a lot of what we said about Shields of Velis Vel is going to translate to the next card, just on a slightly smaller scale. And that's going to be Blades of Velis Vel. Again, we have another tribal instant that's Shapeshifter with Changeling, and it's also, like I said, I'm sorry, I'm babbling here a little bit. Let me try this one again. Blades of Velasvel is also a tribal instant shapeshifter changeling, just like the shields, but this one is 1 in red mana. And it says up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+0 and gain all creature types until end of turn. So this is not giving our entire board the Maskwood Nexus ability. This is giving up to 2 target creatures the Maskwood Nexus ability. However, if all we need are at least 2 creatures that are not changelings, most likely coming from the Changeling Pool, and then suddenly we have an entire board filled with changelings. Blades of Velasvel will help us accomplish our changeling goal at a slightly smaller scale than its predecessor. And lastly, our last addition to the overall 99, it is another red instant. This one is Volatile Claws. Until end of turn, creatures we control get +2/+0 and gain all creature types. Again, this is just accentuating what Maskwood Nexus is doing in this deck and the reason why we've included it. Volatile Claws is going to provide us with a 1-turn Maskwood Nexus effect plus an additional temporary power boost. We could actually look at Volatile Claws to be a potential win condition, and with all intents and purposes, eliminating one of the Changeling Pool cards for a potential win condition, that's just going to make this deck that much stronger. All right, MTG so those are the additions and subtractions to the Changeling deck. Now we have 1 addition and 1 subtraction to the Changeling Pool. Yes, we are evaluating the Changeling Pool as well. And we have identified Werewolf as the tribe that is going to get an upgrade. Representing the Werewolf tribe was Full Moon's Rise. It was an enchantment for 1 and a green mana, and it gave werewolf creatures we control +1/+0 and trample. And then we can sacrifice Full Moon's Rise to regenerate all werewolf creatures we control. So it was a pretty niche thing to give all of our guys a static +1 boost on their power and give them trample. And plus having protection from a potential board wipe is nice by sacrificing it and regenerating all werewolves we control. The +1 and +0 and trample was nice. The potential for the defensive purposes, that was okay too. However, I think its replacement is going to be a card that is a much more valuable offensive threat. And in this deck, as many offensive threats as we can jam into the 99, we want to make sure we do so because we're playing a very flavorful and niche deck. So we want to try to, make sure that there are some ways in which we can fall back on the potential to win with combat. Full Moon Rise's replacement is Tovolar, Dire Overlord. Here we have a 3/3 legendary human werewolf for 1 in Gruul colors. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So that means anytime one of our changelings deals combat damage to an opponent and we have Tovolar on the battlefield, we're going to put a card into our hand. So there is the continuing theme of Stinging Study, getting cards into our hand, making sure that we can stay competitive by not running out of gas. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night. Then we transform any number of human werewolves we control. This will just transfer Tovolar. And again, this is the werewolf representative. This is not the wolf representative of the Changeling Pool. And when we transform Tovolar, we get the Midnight Scourge, a 4/4 that retains the ability to draw a card whenever a wolf or werewolf we control deals combat damage to a player. And we get the benefit of having a, let's say, Kessig Wolf Run-like ability of paying X and Gruul mana and have target wolf or werewolf we control get +X/+0 and trample until end of turn. Notice we do not have to tap Tovolar to do this. So we can give this ability to multiple creatures during the same turn. So we're getting the trample, we're getting the +X power boost that Full Moon's Rise was giving us, but now we're exchanging the potential of regenerating our creatures with the potential of drawing massive amounts of cards whenever we can break through in combat damage. And for me, for the purposes of this deck, Tovolar, Dire Overlord is hands down a better a better option for the werewolf tribe than Full Moon's Rise. But those are just my thoughts. I'd like to know what you think in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.